Hi, welcome to lesson 5 of Surf South Waves All Day. It's on radio waves. Um, this is a confusing one. Confusing maybe isn't the right word. It's weird. Um, we don't normally teach radio waves in school ever, really, um, but I think it's an important topic. All of our communication infrastructure runs on it, and we sort of pretend like it's magic, like we just like radio waves, and that leads to strange things like conspiracy theories around 5G. Um, and so this is an important lesson to bridge with kids, so they start thinking about what radio waves are and how they work, and think of them less as magic and more as science. Um, I know sometimes science and technology can feel like magic, but this might be something that uh, this should be broken down. Um, this video is a little different from the previous videos in that I go over some stuff that maybe isn't as important for kids to know. It's more for teachers to know, just so they get an idea of what the content is, so they have a better understanding of what radio waves are too. Because again, it's not a normal subject that people talk about and teach about. But then again, if we taught if we taught all the computer science standards that are in the state standards, kids wouldn't have to go to college because they'd already have an undergraduate degree in computer science. So sometimes having lofty goals is important, but also knowing when to edit, and in terms of responsive education, knowing what your class is into and what they might want to learn and what they might want to experience is also important. So edit as you see fit this lesson, and take away what you want. The important thing to learn from this lesson is that radio waves are part of the electromagnetic spectrum, that Wi-Fi and Bluetooth use radio waves, and that radio waves are transmitted and received, and data is sent through them. That's pretty much the main takeaways. Oh, and the antennas are used to transmit and receive that. Whoops, no problem. Let's put focus on for 1 hour. All right. Don't want any pesky text messages showing up. All right. Anyway, where was I? Yeah, so this covers quite a few topics, or quite a few areas. Some kids might want to talk about different aspects of it, and really all you need to talk, really the main part of it is radio waves send data using antennas, and that our Wi-Fi routers are the things in our home that are responsible for that, but also our cell phones do that as well. And then once that part is sort of explained, then you can take it in different directions, whether you want to focus on Wi-Fi interference in the home. Interesting, I just got interference in my headset as I was saying that. Or you want to talk about wireless controllers. You want to talk about, bring it back to video games again. Whether you want to talk more about cell technology and different types of cell phone designs. Whether you want to talk about bandwidth and downloading speed and the importance of that and data rates. You want to talk about bugs and bug antennas and how radio waves may or may not interfere with them. There's a lot of different directions to take this in. I wouldn't focus on all of it at all, but teachers know their class best, and what might fit into what you're already doing. So give it a go. All right, let's get started. All right. Neighborhood walks around the school, around your neighborhood. Ask the kids to look up on the roof. They might see, they'll probably, every probably block in New York, every block or two, you pretty much see these antennas on the roof. And ask kids to notice them, maybe take pictures of them. Or you can just look up at any of the skyscrapers in the Manhattan skyline. Look up the World Trade Center. There's a giant antenna on that. And they're all doing the same thing. They're transmitting. So the ones on the left are transmitting cell data. The one on the World Trade Center is doing television, radio, broadcasting, media. But that's a good start. Be like, what's going on these roofs, kids? See these everywhere. Kids will probably guess they're antennas, but maybe they don't really know what antennas are for just yet. And so the idea is that sometimes we interact with a computer wirelessly. We might have a wireless mouse. I have a wireless trackball here that it gets interference. We'll talk about that a little bit later. It gets interference when I plug in certain things. Joy-Cons on the Switch are wireless. Xbox, PlayStation controllers are all wireless. Not all of them. You can get wired ones. And that's what we're talking about. And so you want to pose the question to the kids, how is that working? What is Bluetooth doing? And what it's doing is using radio waves. Similar to electricity and sound, radio signals travel as a wave too. And radio waves are invisible and everywhere, surrounding us as we sit here. I have a nervous look on the emoji's face there, like, ugh, they're everywhere. Radio waves are surrounding us. We're being zapped with radio waves as we speak, and that's just a matter of life. They're everywhere. Hopefully they're not bad. Science doesn't say they are, but you never know. Science changes from time to time. Always be a little skeptical of science, and things sometimes change. We learn new information, but right now I don't think it's anything to be too worried about unless you've got electronics in your body. So then we're going to look at the electromagnetic spectrum again. And we talked about the visible light spectrum here, the colorful part as it's usually shown on the frequency here. And this is a different magnetic spectrum picture than I've shown in the past. So it shows you the relative size of the wavelength of the spectrum. So we get really, really tiny over here. These are gamma rays. And as the wavelengths get larger, as the wavelength gets larger, it shows you the size here, and that becomes like infrared, microwave, radio waves, and it shows you the size compared to people and other things. So it's don't be mistaken. This is just giving you like a sort of a scale to the length. And radio waves can be huge. Radio waves can be, a kilometer long. The whole arc of it, the whole cycle of it going up and down. That can be over a kilometer long. Radio waves can be very big. They travel very far, and that's something that we use to transmit data because they can travel far like that, and they have these. They're nice and wide. They're wide. They are good for transmitting data. And so that's what this slide here is trying to show you. This chart, and it's just showing you like the relative size. Like gamma rays are micro tiny, like a nuclei, and as we move across this, the wavelength gets larger and larger and larger, and then we get to the part that we're using for radio waves. Radio waves or frequency, sorry. When we talk about Wi-Fi, like I said, there's a lot of stuff in here that kind of it jumps around a little bit, just to give people some background knowledge, because this is never really taught to adults, let alone children. When we looked up here, it's showing the frequency down in the bottom, right here. The frequency, how many hertz it is. And so a hertz, what that is measuring is, it's a measure for frequency, and it just means 1 hertz is 1 cycle per second. And another way to say that is that in 1 second, this does blank number of cycles. So if it's 10 hertz, in 1 second it does 10 cycles. And that could be 10 up and down really fast. Or another way to look at it is thinking of it as like a beating heartbeats per minute. So 1 beat per minute, our heart, is beating 60 beats per minute. And so that's 1 beat per second. Not all, this is just an example. Our heart's most people probably around like 70, 75 beats per minute. But in my example here, 1 beat per minute, whoops. I really messed that up. 60 beats per minute. 60 beats per minute is 60 beats in 1 minute, which comes out to 1 beat per second, and that would be 1 hertz. So if we had a heart rate of 60 BPM, we have a heart rate of 1 hertz too. And in this case, the cycle is the heart opening and closing. And I don't know if that helps explain it, but let's do this another way. I'll show my desktop. Our screens refresh every time our computer draws a picture on the screen. That's called the refresh rate of your monitor. And this might screw things up, but let's give it a shot. Where's display? There it is. Okay. So I have a refresh rate of 60 hertz. That means every second my screen updates 60 times a second. Another way of saying that is 60 frames per second. But I can change my refresh rate to 24 hertz. And now it's a little choppier. It's a little choppier because it's only going 24 frames per second now. I could change it to any of these. I'm going to stick with 60 though because it's nice and smooth. Oh, it didn't like that. Uh-oh. Oh, there we go. Whew. You never know when you're messing with your refresh rate if you're going to lose your monitor or not. All right. We'll keep that. So that's another angle to look at it is frames per second. If you got older kids, maybe they think they're gamers. Maybe you're a gamer and you think about frames per second. Gamers generally want minimum 60 frames per second. If they've got a nicer monitor, they maybe want 120 or 144 frames per second. But that is one way to think about a hertz and the measure of it. And so it's how many times something happens in a second. And so if your screen refreshes 60 times in 1 second, that would be 60 hertz. 1 frame per second would be 1 hertz, and that'd be very slow, it'd be very choppy, like a stop motion movie. Hertz is named after a person, Heinrich Hertz. He is the first person to transmit and broadcast and receive radio waves in the 19th century. He was working off of another person's work, as scientists do, but he was the first person to really get it working and continue on that scientific legacy that he was working with. All right. So as I was saying about, made the same mistake here. Okay, so 60 beats per minute, 60 BPM would be 1 hertz. And 1 gigahertz would be 1 billion beats per minute, is another way to look at it. So when we talk about frequencies, we're frequently talking about megahertz and gigahertz. And so that's how many ups and downs, how many waves are in a second in that transmission. So when we talk about frequency for say, 2.4 gigahertz or 5 gigahertz Wi-Fi router, that's 5 billion times a wave is going up and down. Again, I don't know if this is important to bring up with your classes, but it's maybe a little bit important for you. But maybe it is important for the students. Just to get a better understanding of what radio waves are. I might do an appendum to this just to add a bit more after today, hearing some feedback on this, because this is I think the toughest lesson. And it works through something called modulation. And a way to think about that is, let's say you've got a student in your class and they're trying to pass a letter to another student, and they've written a note on a paper, and they throw it, but it's just a piece of paper, so it just falls to the ground. That message doesn't get sent very far. And so they need another way to send it. So they could, this is sort of a classic way to explain modulation, they could wrap that letter around a rock and use that rock to throw the letter across the room, and now their friend can get it. And so that rock has a bit more weight to it. It can travel farther. It can travel through the environment farther. And so that's what modulation is doing. Modulation is using the large radio waves and sending data within those radio waves to send the data. And let me draw a little picture of that. All right, let's see here. Okay. Okay. Oh, a little blurry there. Monitor. Okay. So let's say we've got, I don't want to get too into the details of this because this is, I don't know, this is not the most exciting topic. Similar to how we talked about how electrical waves can encode binary. Oh, it keeps getting blurry. Let's say, so we've got some data we want to send, and we convert that into an electrical signal. We got ups and downs. And then we've got we've got our message, and then we've got our carrier signal. And our carrier signal is this nice big wave that we're trying to integrate into. And modulation isn't really adding it in. And there's different ways to modulate. So I'm not going to go into the three main ways we modulate, but they work based off of amplitude, frequency, or phase shifting. So we got our message and our carrier, and then I'm going to do our modulated signal down here. And this is not at all, drawing is not accurate, but it will take this. So we've got our digital signal. This is digital up here. And we've got our carrier radio wave. And it is going to, our modulated signal is going to use that wave, and it's going to kind of look like this. Actually, that's a terrible of this. Should have made an example ahead of time. Anyway, it's combining two signals, and it creates a third. So it has the wave that it's traveling off of, the rock, and it's got the signal we want to send the message, and it's combining those in a way that maybe I'll just do it underneath here. It will like spike with this wave, and this is an example of amplitude, and it will sort of match the carrier signals. Wave pattern, but with the message that we want to send, so that that's what the modulation does. It converts it, and then when it's received, it demodulates it and converts it back into this by using the frequency that it's expecting. Not a great explanation. It works better with a simulator, but I couldn't find any good simulators and or good graphics for it. Anyway, so there's this concept called modulation that basically converts a radio wave, a digital signal into a radio wave, and demodulate takes that radio wave and turns it back into a digital signal. And antennas are for broadcasting and receiving that. And receiving that signal. That's weird. Okay, so antennas are for doing that, and that's where we get back to our warm-up question. What are these doing on the roof? They are sending and receiving signals using antennas. And that brings us to cellular technology. And so cellular technology It's the cellular part of it is we're breaking areas down into cells. And each tower sort of has a cell area that it's responsible for. And so each cell might be serving one or more, served by one or more transceivers. That's what these things in the towers, that's what these things in a roof are called, transceivers. Transceivers send and receive data, because they're not just doing one thing, they're doing both of them, so they call them transceivers. And so an area might be served by more than one. They're not broken up in grids, like in this picture here. They're not broken up into grids. I just made it that way to make it look, to make it a bit more clear. But they are, so there's some overlap there, like you might switch towers or something, and tower switching has become a lot easier. You know, maybe if you remember, if you're a little older and you remember using cell phones in the 90s or early 2000s, you might be driving around and switching towers and losing your signal as you switch. That doesn't really happen as much now. At least I don't feel like it does, but I'm not a big cell talker. But there's definitely overlap in the cells and what transceivers cover what areas. And so phones connect to the transceiver using radio waves. And so these transceivers are receive and transmit the radio waves, as do our cell phones. And that leads to the question, the cell phones also have antennas in them too. Now we're going to go over a bit of cell phone technology. First we're going to 4G and 5G are like the ones that we, and 3G, 4G, and 5G are what we know of as cell stuff now, but we're going to go over all the different generations just to give us some coverage. No one called it 0G when it first started, obviously, but this is what they called 0G. Whoops, and it's not the first generation. Let's call this pre-cell technology. And so this started, and then I think it started in 1946, was when it was first like sort of invented. And this is pre-cellular. It's using just radio waves, really, non-digital, not really cellular. It's like point-to-point, basically. It's not broke when they say pre-cellular. Now that we know that cellular is zones, there's no real zones for this. It's just point-to-point, transceiver to transceiver, big towers. Think like ham radio and stuff like that. And these had briefcase and backpack phones. So here's a briefcase one that was pretty popular at the time. And here's a look at the inside of it. I believe these are the batteries over here. At least that's what they look like to me. But maybe they're not. Maybe they're capacitors. You see a speaker here. You see a bunch of resistors here. I wonder what the horn button does. Anyway, so this is a briefcase one. I show a bunch of different phones in this because kids now, you know, phones look like phones now. Pretty much everything looks, you know, it's a flat screen, and so I thought it'd be fun to show them different kinds of phones. Then we get into 1G, the first generation of cell technology, which was first deployed in 1979 in Tokyo, Japan. Most cell technology first starts in either Japan or Korea. 4 years later, it makes its way to the United States in Chicago. And so these were the 1G phones. This one's called the brick phone because it was big like a brick. Here's a lunchbox phone. I think this is from Lethal Weapon here. They called it a lunchbox one because you carried it around like a lunchbox. Then we have 2G, second generation cell technology. This started in 1991. It had a max speed of 5 kilobytes per second, which is not a lot. I'm going to talk about this in a second. When you look up like data speeds, it's important to look at the size of the B, whether it's capital or lowercase, because they do trickery on this, but I'll talk about that a little bit later. Max speed of 5 kilobytes per second, not very fast. You know, that's like dial-up speed in the 90s, basically. And it was made for voice. People weren't really thinking about data back then. They weren't thinking about downloading videos or images or even text messages. It was all for voice. And so this is commonly referred to as like GSM or CDMA. And there were upgrades in 2003. Like this technology when it first came out was 5 kilobytes per second. But as they upgraded the tech and changed some ways they were doing things, they got a max download speed of 48 kilobytes per second, which, you know, that's probably not great for 2003, but probably pretty good for like 2000. And these are the 2G phones. They still call this one a brick phone. These are various Nokias, and you could point out the antennas on here. This one had an antenna that didn't come out. This one had an antenna that got pulled up. Then we got the ubiquitous candy bar phone. There's more fun 2G designs. Here's one that had a computer in it. This is the Nokia communicator. Nokia made these cool communicator ones in the 90s and early 2000s. That had like keyboards in them, and you could do internet type things on there. It was more like a PDA that could do, you know, there were some programs on there. They didn't really have apps back then. They had programs though. You know, people could write their own too back then, but it was sort of like when you wrote your own games for a calculator. It wasn't always the most advanced technology. Here's a slide phone. This one's from The Matrix from 1999. Pretty sweet phone if you were in high school back then. Then we get to 3G, the third generation, also called G. Wait, did I mess something up there? Maybe I did. All right. Also considered GSM. And this started when it was in 2001 at 18 kilobytes per second. And this one was designed for voice, but they also started making data considerations. This is pre-smartphone, but I show the iPhone here. This is the iPhone 2, because that was like the first. The iPhone was big when it came out, but this was the one that really like made the iPhone. iPhone 2 had 3G speeds, and by 2008, 3G could get up to 2 megabytes per second download, which is like broadband speeds practically. So that's when you could really like download images, and the market was really ready for, you know, internet on the phones at that point, and downloading images and videos and sending pictures around. So it really popped in 2008 when the download speeds were up and the iPhone came out. But there were still some cool phones during that era, pre-iPhone, pre-smartphone. We got the N-Gage Taco phone. You can play video games on this, like Game Boy games, Game Boy Advance like era games. And people called it the taco phone. You held it really weird. I should have put a picture in of someone calling on it, but you basically held it like you were holding a taco up to your head. So you could play games. You could do business on a BlackBerry. You could also look fashionable. Here's a lipstick phone. This one was from Nokia's like fashion line. So we have a lipstick phone, and we have this teardrop looking phone. I don't know if anyone called it, it's called teardrop shape. I don't know if anyone called it the teardrop phone. People definitely called this one the lipstick phone. I remember when this came out. These were both hits too, by the way. These won like design awards and everything. I think they're cool. I love weird technology, and I wish in a way, I don't really use a smartphone. I use an iPad mini. I don't really carry a phone around. But I wish phones were weird like this. And so if you're doing any craft projects, any craft computing projects with kids, it's, you know, let them know that devices used to look different. My son's been making phones for some reason in his classes, and he makes phones that look like phones. And I want to tell him, like, no, you can have weird looking phones. Technology can be different. In 2006, we get 4G, aka LTE. That had real broadband speeds. That's what probably a lot of us use now, is probably using 4G. And that speeds up to 12 megabytes per second. And that's definitely designed for data. You are downloading lots of stuff on 4G. That is modern tech here. It says 2006, which seems like a long time ago, but it didn't really, you know, hit the marketplace till a few years later, and now it's sort of ubiquitous, except for the mysterious 5G, fifth generation tech. It's a broad range of technology. When people say 5G, it's a broad range of bandwidths and frequencies that it's working on. And so there's basically low frequency, low bandwidth ones that can go really far. So you're trading off ranges. So you're trading off speed, like download speed for further distances. There's also like the typical frequencies that we're working in, which is around like 900 megahertz to like 5 gigahertz. And those are the ones that are getting up to 125 megabits a second. It also has more connectivity, so a lot more devices can connect to it because it's got these low-powered versions. It's got better downloads, but mostly it's about the power. It supports low-power broadcasting, which is just really helpful for portable devices and far distances. As we're talking about 5G, I guess it's important to talk about, like, there are conspiracy theories around 5G. Maybe some kids in your class think them. I don't know. So I thought I would just cover some topics from 5G. Insects versus radio waves. We have a problem with our insects dying. And the bee population is decreasing. No one knows why. Some people think it might be pesticides. Maybe it's something to do with climate change. Maybe it has something to do with radio waves. Maybe it's all of them. Maybe it's a combination. And so some scientists studied, do radio waves cause problems with bugs? And they found out that with high frequencies, like greater than 6 gigahertz, which is greater than most phones are operating on. Again, the phones are operating on typically below 6 gigahertz, but there are 5G systems that use above 6 gigahertz to go far distances. Those can heat up bugs through like what they call like a dipole effect. It's similar to how like a microwave works. Imagine the wave is passing through, and as it's passing through, it's moving something up and down. And when movement happens, that causes things to heat up. That's how a microwave works. It sends signals through, and it causes waves to bounce the water ions in the water molecules in your food, and that causes them to heat up, which is why you need water for a microwave to work. But similar things happen with bugs with higher frequency ones, and they cause the bugs to heat up, which can cause problems. And so the scientists did find that could be a problem. They also looked at, a different set of scientists looked at radio waves to see how they affected bird senses. And they found out that 5G high frequency waves were pretty safe. They didn't see any problems there. They did find out that AM waves, which are lower frequency, AM radio is what I'm talking about here, actually could affect the ability for birds to orient with Earth's magnetic field. So birds have a sense for figuring out where they are using a magnetic field, and the scientists found that AM waves could affect that sense, but that birds can adapt, and they have multiple senses to orient themselves, and so it's not a complete problem for them. They have a way around it, but maybe it's not ideal. Wi-Fi, we're going to switch from cell technology to Wi-Fi now. Wi-Fi stands for wireless fidelity. Doesn't really mean anything. It's just a marketing play on hi-fi audio. If you're a audio person, maybe you or older, maybe you've heard of like hi-fi audio equipment, which stands for high fidelity. So they were trying to make wireless tech sound cool, so they thought Wi-Fi sounded cool, wireless fidelity, but it doesn't really mean anything. It's not particularly scientific. It's just a marketing term. And they needed a marketing term because a lot of times Wi-Fi goes by the standard IEEE 802.11 or 802.11. And that's the standard for it. And when you buy a router, you'll see that listed on the back of a box. 802.11, and then you'll see like .11g or .11n or AC or AX. And so those are all different versions of Wi-Fi. They don't call them Wi-Fi, 3, 4, 5, 6. They only started doing that very, very recently when they realized they had a weird problem with the naming of Wi-Fi. It was confusing going by these letters. But the letters, 802.11g is the standard, was the standard for a long time. That would get you 56 megabits per second. You notice how that B is lowercase. And that is some marketing trickery to make it sound faster than it is. Because a bit, remember, a byte is 8 bits. So measuring things in bits, you're basically dividing by 8 for everything. And so 54 megabits is really only 6.75 megabytes per second. I have all the conversions here just so that you can see the marketing trickery here. We have Wi-Fi 4, which is, that's what it's called now, but it was 802.11n, or sometimes they called it Wi-Fi N. I remember seeing that on some boxes, and that was 600 megabits per second, which is really only 75 megabytes. Which sounds like a lot, but when you're talking about like your internal network, if you're moving data around your network, like you're trying to send a file to another computer in your house, that's not really all that fast. And that's like the fastest speed you can get. Ultimately, you never get the fastest speed when you're dealing with these numbers here. You're always getting something this is getting something probably 2/3 of that in reality. Wi-Fi 5, which is 802.11 AC, would be 3.5 gigabits per second, or 437 megabytes. And then we have Wi-Fi 6, which is 5 and 6 are when they really started using those numbers, which is AX, and that finally gets into the gigabyte range of 1.2 gigabytes per second. And that stuff's brand new, so most people probably don't have a Wi-Fi 6 router. Certainly if you're getting like the Optimum or Spectrum router that they give you when you get internet access for your home, it's probably not Wi-Fi 6, it's probably Wi-Fi 5 AC. This is getting into stuff that kids might want to know more of. So this is a router. The router, sometimes you see antennas on it, sometimes the antennas are inside. And so these send and receive data for internet in the homes. A lot of kids have internet at home, but maybe they don't. Maybe there's areas where they have dead zones. And so this is a good point to have a conversation with kids about the what am I trying to say here? So this is a good way to bring up antennas and Wi-Fi and learn a bit about your students and what's happening in their homes with the internet, especially since we're coming out of the pandemic where kids might not have the best internet, might learn that kids don't have the best internet at home. Or maybe they're complaining, they're like, oh, I can't get it in my bedroom. And maybe that's because they have one of these two routers. Like this is the one that I think you get with Optimum, the Aris surfboard. And you'll notice it doesn't have any antennas on the outside like this fancy Linksys one does. Fewer antennas mean it doesn't transmit as strong of a signal and doesn't receive as strong of a signal, which means you're going to have like times where your internet cuts out, where your Wi-Fi cuts out, and so you can't get on the internet. And kids might want to know that, especially older kids, as they're becoming more of like the techie in their family, about knowing what kind of upgrades they can do to make their internet better. And one of those things is getting a router that has big antennas on it that can transmit big signals. Having big antennas on the outside doesn't make it a good router. I know this one with the 3 antennas here, it is a good router. It has some other tech in there that makes it a good transceiver, but it's something that kids should be thinking about. A lot of times we also put our routers on the floor. In this case, this isn't just a router. This middle one isn't just a router. It's also a modem, which means it's modulating into the cable wire. We talked about modulating earlier, so it's sending a signal over the cable to do internet typically, or maybe you have fiber optic, which is modulating with light through fiber optic. But computers have antennas in them. Phones have antennas in them. Typically, we don't see antennas anymore. Mostly that's because a lot of our technology is made out of metal, and metal is a great antenna. And so they really just have these thin wires that connect to the cases. And so they're using the antennas connecting to other parts of the device to create a bigger antenna. But when you open up a computer, like if you open up a broken laptop, you usually find the antenna wrapped around the edges of the screen. So these are antennas that are pulled out of, I think on the right here is a MacBook, and the one over here is some kind of Chromebook, but they're all just like common components, a long wire with a little plug on the end. And so these are the antennas that you find in a laptop. In a phone, you find something similar that wraps around. I tried to get a good picture. I should have taken, I have a Joy-Con that I was modifying. I should have taken a picture of the one in there. There's also antennas in our controllers, and so like Nintendo has gotten a bit of heat from like gamers, as gamers do, about them not putting good enough antennas in one of their Joy-Cons, so it cuts out frequently, and so people like modify the antenna in their Joy-Con. But Wi-Fi is subjected to interference. So interference is something that disrupts the signal, and so lots of things can interrupt Wi-Fi. We've got walls. Walls can be a big problem. Thick walls are a problem. Generally, if you have a router, you want to put it up high. Up high is better than down on the floor. But walls can be a big problem, or metal doors, or any door really. Back in the day, I don't know if this is as much a problem now, but I remember in college when I would turn on my microwave, it would mess up Wi-Fi in my apartment. And so microwaves are another part of the electromagnetic spectrum, and they can interfere with Wi-Fi. Pretty much any wave, any of the waves on the other side can mess with it. Microwaves, I think I mentioned in a previous lesson that gamma waves can mess with it, but that's pretty rare, but not impossible. Walls and microwaves are a bigger problem. The biggest problem, though, especially in the dense area of New York, is other wave-emitting devices. We've got so much tech now transmitting waves. In my apartment building, I've got 14 other apartment buildings, most likely with Wi-Fi routers in them, that are all transmitting signals, and all those signals can interfere. And so there's different channels that your different ranges of frequency that your device can be on. So when they say like your router is 5 gigahertz, what they really mean is it's a range of like 5 to like 5.6 gigahertz, and it breaks up into sections of channels. Like every 100 gigahertz is a different channel that you're broadcasting on. So some routers will look for the best channel to the best range, the best channel to transmit on. Other routers just pick the default one, and a lot of routers just pick 0, and so everything is transmitting on channel 0, and that causes a lot of interference. So sometimes you just go into your settings and you pick a different channel, and you'll get better Wi-Fi. Other times you've got too many walls in your apartment and too many devices transmitting, and that can cause problems. Coiled wires create interference. So if you're a science teacher, maybe you've taught about electromagnets before, which work with coiled wires, and so when you run electricity through it, it creates a magnet, and that can be a problem for Wi-Fi. So if you've got a lot of coiled things around, it can cause interference. Same thing with the over here. I have this blue wire, which is an Ethernet wire. That's you'd plug that into your computer, and coiled wires, if they're not shielded properly, can create interference, and they even interfere with itself, create its own interference that's messing with itself. So when you're looking at wires, thicker wires are usually, sometimes it's just to keep them from breaking, but other times the thickness is to shield it from interference. And so that's why some wires are thicker than others, is to shield them from these problems. Other times it's to protect them from breaking and fraying, but a lot of times, especially when you get into like industrial wiring, it's to prevent interference. And that kind of covers the main content that I want that should be covered in this, but there's more. I'm gonna actually let me go over the activity really quick. So I really want kids to learn about antennas, and basically I want kids to learn about that they probably have a router in their home and it's got antennas on it, and you know, that is what's responsible for the internet, and the position of that thing and the quality of that thing can affect their internet. And that it's transmitting and receiving radio signals, and that these things here can interfere with your radios, with your radio waves. So since we're talking about antennas, we can build an antenna project. And for that project, it's similar to the not-a-box craft computing stuff, where you're making stuff out of craft materials. And so there's a version of it where you can base it on a creature's antennas. We've done a version where we build a lot of tech around butterflies, butterfly sensors, and stuff like that. And so one of those is we build butterfly antennas. And so you just need aluminum foil and something to wrap around your head. You can just use paper, a sheet of paper that gets cut in half. I'm going to tape it together. Hopefully I made it big enough for my big head. Nope, my big head's too big. I did not make it big enough. I guess I needed the whole sheet to not. Anyway. So the kids get some aluminum foil, maybe some pipe cleaner, and they're just going to mold it and shape it. Antennas can... what they found recently was that, and I say recently, I mean like in the last 20 years, that fractals are really good for shaping antennas. And so a fractal, I don't have a good picture of it here, but fractals are things that repeat again and again, and that makes a good antenna. So I'm just going to make some simple ones here, because I'm short on time. So imagine you've got, I'm going to make them a little bent. Let me zoom that out. All right. My failed modulation example. Should have thought about that a little bit more. My days get really packed, everyone, as the year goes on. And I came from doing tech support and teaching today. Tech support outside, teaching in the classroom, and ran straight here. And my brain's a bit fried. I've got my own interference going on with my brain waves. All right. Really simple example here. And so you get this. Imagine if my head was tiny and I could make a crown like this. And so you can make some bug tech. That's what we call it when we do this in the classroom. Bug tech. Where is it? And then you would wear it like that. I obviously didn't spend a lot of time making it fancy. Kids can design the paper part. Something that's cool is you can also use headbands, like the bands that, like those plastic ones that you might get in a store. You can get a bunch of those cheap ones. I've gotten them on Amazon before and put them on. I'll see if I can find some examples of that for you for later. But you make some antennas, and they're wearable, and you can talk about antennas that way. You can also create a wireless controller. So if you've been building the console, we use wireless controllers now. So maybe your console is going to have a wireless controller. And they just have to remember when they're making the controller, they have to make a tiny little antenna in it. Antennas can be separate, or they can be embedded on the board. There's on one of the Joy-Cons that we were showing earlier from the third slide has, one of them has the antenna embedded on the board. But they have to make sure they add a receiver inside the console and a antenna onto the controller as well. I want to talk about some extensions, and the extensions are really just different ways you can take the lessons. Don't think of them as extensions. Like once you get the radio antenna concept down, these are different directions you could take it into. So radio waves are everywhere. Even aliens can listen to them. Or maybe we can listen to aliens. So SETI at Home was something big in the 90s, where they have all this data from radios from space that they collect with satellites, and they were using computers. This is still I think it's still a project where they were using home computers that were idling. Instead of using to mine Bitcoin, they're using them to look for aliens. And so they would analyze these radio signals to look for certain patterns in them that might, be an alien signal. And so they were using our computers to analyze the radio waves that could be coming from an alien planet or spaceship. You never know, in outer space, which is kind of cool. But on the other side of that, because radio waves are everywhere, we're constantly in a state of, are we being surveilled? And there's been articles about the NYPD using something called the Stingray, which is that little box over here, where they have fake transceivers that work as man-in-the-middle attacks, where the cell phones connect to these transceivers, and so the NYPD can see what phones are connecting to it and what they might be communicating on there. And it's been shown in the New York Times and the Washington Post and other exposés that the NYPD uses these at protests to track who's at the protests, and other things like that. This military-grade gear for spying on the public. But don't worry, math to the rescue. Some of that can be saved with cryptography, which is outside of the scope of this, but end-to-end encryption can help prevent some of that spying. They can still see what phones connect, but they can't see the messages that are sent on them. So a lot of protesters used services like Signal and Telegram to send messages so that they can't be tracked, because those use end-to-end encryption. And that's it for today. This lesson was a bit rushed, but thanks for joining us. Let me know if you have any other questions, and we're gonna do one more video where we add on and make some appendums and edits and updates, and if anyone has anything they want to share, we can add that to the final video. Thank you. Bye.